Hello, Star Trek fans. Welcome to ReBinge It. This is the ReBinge Star Trek Voyager podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And my name's Atiba.
And we are rebinging every episode of Star Trek Voyager from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on Season 2, Episode 15, Threshold. This episode aired January 29th, 1986. So we are closing
86?
out... 86? 96. Oh my God. This episode aired January 29th, 1996, not 1986, like I just said. We are closing out January 1996 with a doozy of an episode.
Oh, yeah.
And to help us with this discussion, we have frequent guest host Atiba Royster. Atiba, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be on the podcast and talking about Threshold.
Do I need to ask why you picked Threshold to do it?
Why?
Okay, so as I may or may not have stated on this podcast before, I'm a lover of bad 80s and 90s B horror and sci-fi movies. And I feel like Threshold has a lot of things, if you are a fan of bad B movies, that you'll enjoy and find very familiar. So
Okay.
That works. Yes.
It's like one of those bottom of the barrel kind of Twilight Zone episodes, you know, where people talk about how great Twilight Zone was. Most of Twilight Zone episodes were terrible. And yeah, this one to fit right in there.
Hey, to tie this back to a great episode of Atiba's podcast, this is like the video store on Friday night about, 9:30, when everything else is out and you're looking at the bottom row of movies where it's like, oh, this is the stuff that's left? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll try this one.
Threshold. Great.
time to watch Velocipaster.
Right.
Oh my God. What is that?
Velocipaster? Oh, it's great. It's about a priest that transforms into a velociraptor. It's incredible.
Sure, why not?
And it has to be on VHS.
It does have to be on VHS. Actually, there's a movie called, sorry for a quick digression here, there's a movie called Killer Workout. Its alternate title is Aerobicide. You know it's a really good movie when you have an alternate title.
Oh, no.
The Amazon version of the movie that I watched has auto-tracking correction at the end of it. And it's just all the better for having that.
Wow.
Nice.
So many people aren't even going to know what that means.
Sorry, Gen Z, but yes.
Yeah. Well, let's see. What else do we have to talk about before we get started? I guess we could ask about your Comic-Con. Anything you'd like to share about your Comic-Con experience?
I was in Artist Alley tabling for the first time. I had a phenomenal experience. I want to say thanks to everybody that asked me for commission. Kim bought a wonderful 10th Doctor piece for me, and I thank you for that purchase.
I'm very excited to have it. I'm just waiting for James to get it in a frame. I'm going to hang it right over my desk.
James, get on that.
Get on that.
Okay.
But overall, fantastic experience. Would recommend. And if anyone listening hasn't had a chance to come to Comic-Con yet, you really should. It's the nerd mecca for a reason, and you really should come check it out. And when you do, come see me at my table.
Yeah, we've talked quite a bit about Comic-Con on our podcast. And maybe because it's important to us and we go all the time, but also just to try to help people understand what it is. Because it's not, if you haven't been there, it's not what you think it is. It's something different.
Yeah.
And there's something there for everybody.
Exactly.
Okay, then I guess we should get started on Threshold. We've put it off long enough. And look,
Can we talk about something else?
there's some absolute wackadoo stuff that's going to happen in this episode. So, and I know we're going to talk about a lot. So
Yeah.
I'm going to try to rush through the details and also maybe even skip some things that just don't matter. But there's some things we have to talk about.
No, every tasty detail must
No,
be.
God, we'd be here for so long. Oh, no.
By the way, I cannot wait for the women of the future for this episode.
I don't think that it's what you're expecting. Let's put it that way. But I'm glad you're excited.
Whatever it is, I'm sure it's fantastic.
Okay. Oh, my God. In the cold open, Tom is flying a shuttle and trying to reach warp 10 using a trans-warp drive. As he gets closer to the threshold, hence the title, things start to go wrong and we hear B'Elanna and Harry telling him to adjust things. We get to warp 9.95 and the nacelles aren't holding, and Tom says he's breaking up and the shuttle explodes, leaving Tom sitting on the floor of the holodeck with Harry and B'Elanna looking on, and B'Elanna flatly says, "You're dead." And we cue the theme song. I mean, from here, we're doing great. That's a great opening.
Yes.
No complaints. No, I think it's quick, it's short, it's no big deal. Anything could happen from here. After the credits, the three are sitting in the mess hall discussing how every time they get close to crossing the threshold of warp 10, the subspace torque rips the nacelles off the shuttle. Nilix stops by their table to give them coffee and asks if he can help, and they do kind of make fun of him a bit, asking if he knows anything about multispectral subspace engine design. He points out he did 2 years as an engineer's assistant aboard a freighter, so he's a little defensive on how they're not including him in the conversation. So they eventually tell him they're trying to break the warp barrier, which is a theoretical impossibility, because if you ever reach 10, you'll be traveling at infinite velocity and you would be everywhere all at once, which is a different movie with Michelle Yeoh.
So they're bringing Michelle Yeoh into the series pretty early.
Obviously, they are interested in this because they could get Voyager home quickly, and apparently this idea came from a discovery of a new form of dilithium recently, which remains stable at a higher warp frequency. And then Neelix tells a folksy story, which makes Tom have a realization that the nacelles aren't being torn from the ship is being torn from the nacelles. They get all excited. There's some new technobabble. And we tell Neelix he's a genius, and we run out. And we're like, okay, here we go.
Wave our hands at that a little bit.
We run another simulation in the holodeck, and this time everything works, and Tom is able to reach warp 10 without exploding. And they share the results with Janeway and Chakotay, who are very impressed. So they make a plan for a real-life test because they need to prove it would be safe. While Janeway and Chakotay are cautious, they recognize this as an important advancement, and they wish the crew luck. And Janeway says Tom will be joining an elite group of pilots in history like Zefram Cochrane.
I think this is probably one of the heaviest technobabble episodes of Star Trek ever.
Okay.
I think this is actually beating some of those conversations that Data and Geordi would have.
The amount of technobabble word salad going on in this episode. And that was one of the hits on early Voyager, is that, like, it's just so much technobabble.
Yeah.
It's really on display here. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Multi-spatial subspace engine design, which sounds like, to repeat a joke I heard elsewhere, sounds like the shuttle's running on rainbows. Subspace torque, like, what is rotated? Never mind. Okay.
That's good stuff. Later, the captain goes to visit Tom, who is in his quarters in his bathrobe, which is not something you see on Star Trek every day. She's here to deliver some bad news. The doctor has discovered that Tom has a slight enzymatic imbalance in his cerebellum, so he has recommended that Harry make the test flight. Tom is devastated and asks what the risk is, and it turns out there's a 2% chance he could suffer a brain hemorrhage. Tom then makes a dramatic plea about unrealized potential from his childhood and how he just wants an opportunity to do something meaningful. He begs Janeway to let him make the flight, and she agrees, seeing how important it is to him and realizing that he's accepting of the risk.
What's funny about that isn't the whole idea of this test flight still inherently dangerous? So I don't get why Janeway would be worried about this part when this whole concept is inherently dangerous.
I don't think that Janeway was particularly worried about it. I think she was bringing the message from the doctor to allow Tom to decide whether or not he wanted to take the 2% risk.
Yeah.
She didn't come in and say, "You're not doing this." She came in and said, "Here's what the doctor said." She listened to him, and then she said, "Okay."
Interesting. I saw it more as Tom begging her to let him go because she wasn't prepared to.
I think this was part of the story that they were trying to really force into this episode, which is that Tom has some sort of feeling of unrealized potential. And I don't think they sold it at all. I think they tried really hard, but I don't think they sold it in terms of character development.
That makes sense there. I mean, it almost should have been sold as more of a, Tom, are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah.
Okay, so not the first time I'm going to have issue with something the costume designer did in this episode, but...
Why the bathrobe?
Why the bathrobe? Why? We've seen this scene in other iterations of Star Trek where the captain will come in and into a more intimate setting and talk with one of his officers. I can't think of one occasion when someone was in a bathrobe.
They might be in their pajamas. Like, remember Cisco? He had his full, 1950s jammies. Yeah. Never a bathrobe, with their feet out like that. No, never. It's a weird episode from beginning to end. It's very weird.
It's just a lot of weird decisions.
If this were not Star Trek, that wouldn't be weird. But it's weird on Star Trek because it's just not what normally happens.
It's true.
So now we're on to the real live test with a shuttlecraft that they've named Cochrane. And this time, everything seems to work and Tom reaches the threshold.
Because, they've got 3 shuttles on Voyager.
I'm telling you, they can rebuild them. You just don't see that.
They can replicate them. They just have a giant replicator.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they just are replicating parts. They got one guy, that's his only job, is to put all the parts together. Communications distort and the shuttle disappears, which for some reason they all seem shocked by. But I'm like, isn't that why wouldn't you expect that if they hit warp 10, the thing would go beyond what you could see? I don't know.
They're doing all this modeling and nobody thought, how do we deal with comms?
Or how do we catch him after he goes to warp 10? I mean, I don't know. It's, very strange. After an ad break, we don't have to worry because the shuttle emerges from subspace. They beam Tom to sickbay, and Janeway runs to check on him, and we see Tom seemingly unconscious on the biobed, but the doctor says he's just asleep. And so Janeway says, well, can you wake him? So the doctor leans in very close to Tom and shouts, wake up, which is absolutely ridiculous and hilarious at the same time, and the exact right tone for the weirdness of this episode.
That made me laugh. Who sleeps that heavily?
It was very funny. And there is a moment here with Janeway where she's got a look on her face after he does that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, what even is this episode that I'm in?
Okay. I think that falls under number 1. Eye roll.
From Janeway or from you?
From me. My note here says, this is the point that the episode headed off into the ravine.
No way.
No
way.
I think it's later. No later.
Way.
This for me is where, the Back to the Future 3, where that train goes over the ravine. This is where it starts.
No, I think this episode started in the ravine. And Picardo's the only one that understands that. So...
Oh
my God, that's funny. I mean, it's funny that we all sort of have different perspectives of when it went off the rails. Tima, you think it started off the rails and never was on the rails. I actually, during the pandemic, for some reason, I watched this episode. I think somebody mentioned it or I don't know, but I went back and I watched it and I got to a certain point in the episode where I was like, this episode's fine. What's the big deal? And then it's like, oh my God, after this point, I'm just like, where are we going? That cliff has happened. And then James thinks it's happened here. But again, I don't even think this is that strange for Star Trek. It's a weird tone. And the bathrobe is weird. And a few other things are weird. But I still don't think we're off the cliff. I think the cliff is still coming. Tom describes the experience as being almost out of body, where he could see everything. B'Elanna comes rushing in, excited to report that the shuttle is in perfect condition, and the logs confirm that he made it to warp 10. And then we have a little bit more of a peculiar moment when the doctor says he wants to run some tests on His Majesty before returning him to the realm of ordinary humans. Again, just a weird tone.
Yep.
So we download the logs from the shuttle, and B'Elanna says the data describes every cubic centimeter in the sector. It's over 5 billion gigaquads of information. And as a former database person, I hope your storage devices are big enough. And don't forget about the backup devices as well. Every time I talk about data, I freak out.
That's a lot of data just on a shuttle.
That is a lot of data.
And it's an awful lot of data considering they're going down to the centimeter when you're talking about, apparently according to the Star Trek wikis, a sector is a 20 square light year cube, and they're going down to the centimeter. This was actually my second full eye roll of this episode. The fact that they have all this data captured apparently simultaneously.
Yes, instantaneously, yeah. When Janeway says it appears the theory of infinite velocity is correct, we see the engineer who was trying to buddy up to Seska a few episodes ago listening carefully in the background, and this seems like trouble. B'Elanna is excited at the prospect of getting Voyager home, but Janeway views it as larger and says it could change the very nature of our existence.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah.
how exactly?
Oh, you're going to be sad you asked that question.
Well, because of what they're saying here, which is that you could be anywhere, everywhere, anywhere, all at once, right?
But how does that actually change your existence?
Well, I think you start looking at time and space differently, and it would change the way you think about things. It would change everything.
Because you could spy on everyone and become a true galactic power.
Well, you're looking at it in a different way. You're looking at it in a less philosophical way. But yeah, if you're thinking of it as how would it physically change things, it wouldn't. Yeah.
So Janeway could become, if she harnessed this, Janeway could become the queen of the galaxy.
The universe.
Sure.
Yeah.
The universe, yeah.
They're everywhere all at once.
Mm-hmm.
The galactic barrier means nothing.
You're functionally omnipresent.
Especially if they don't share it.
You know what? Take that technology and kick Q's ass.
Well, now Tom and B'Elanna are back in the mess hall looking over some data pads when Tom suddenly doesn't feel well. He grabs his head and falls to the floor, and the transporter is unable to lock onto him to beam him to sickbay. So at this point, we know something is already going on. That's strange. And we see some veins appearing on Tom's face, and the area around his eyes turns purple. He's in great distress.
The ominous forehead veins. Whenever you see those.
Yep, we get the veins. Or with Tuvok, it's always his eyes go freaky. They all go yellow, and then you know something bad's happening.
I will say the makeup in this episode is probably the one part you can point at and say, this is good.
I want to say they won an Emmy for it.
Okay.
I think they did.
Some of the Tom Paris makeup to come is pretty good, actually.
Yeah.
So, all right. Somebody has something to hang their hat on when it comes to this episode.
After the ad break, we get Tom to sickbay where the doctor calmly suggests that he's having an allergic reaction to the water in the coffee he was drinking.
And this is eye roll number 3.
Apparently, it's an actual thing that can happen because I looked it up. But
really? You can develop an allergy to water?
Only, like the skin, not the inside.
Oh, not your organs don't start shutting down.
Yeah, what about the water in his body?
Oh, that's totally different.
Oh, right.
So really quickly, this is costuming question number 2.
Yeah.
Was I the only person that was asking why is Cass in a sling all of a sudden? What happened to her arm? Because she has this thing that goes across her chest that looks exactly like a sling.
She's in a weird outfit.
Oh, I did not notice that.
Yeah. In my watch a few years ago, I do think this is sort of the point where I thought we're going off the rails. Now it's getting quite dumb, but it gets worse.
My train is now halfway down the canyon.
No, I'm not in the canyon yet. There's one moment where I'm in the canyon, but we are not there yet. For me, I'm like, we're off the rails.
Yep.
We're heading towards the cliff. You could still save it, but we're not going to save it. Well, apparently Tom's entire biochemistry is changing and his electrolytes are breaking down. He starts gasping for air and there's some kind of mutation going on in his lungs and they no longer process oxygen. So the doctor erects an isolation field around Tom, removing the oxygen, and eventually he's able to breathe or whatever it is he needs to do. And I don't think that ever comes up again in the episode where he can't breathe oxygen because we take him out of there later and he seems fine. And then down on this planet, he's breathing the same air as the humans. I don't know. We forget. It's like we forgot about it.
Like so many things in this episode, that bit just gets forgotten about. Sweep that under the rug.
Well, something does happen soon, which renders the ability to breathe or not kind of moot. So,
True.
Tom, at this point, screams, and the doctor says his cellular membranes are deteriorating and Tom is dying. The doctor sends B'Elanna out to bring back all the information of what happened to Tom on the shuttle during his test flight, which, why wouldn't you just have access to it from the computer?
Well, hopefully B'Elanna can print it out so he can read it.
Yeah, maybe he prints it. After the ad break, the doctor and Kes continue to work on Tom, but really with no improvement. Tom says he knows he's going to die, but the doctor hasn't given up yet. And Tom rambles here about his funeral, where there will be lots of pretty girls crying, except for Torres, who doesn't cry. And it's just like, what is happening?
This raises an interesting question.
Torres cries. She does. It happens.
Yeah. I was going to bring up, does Torres have tear ducts? Because Klingons don't have them. So in her mixed DNA...
Klingons don't have tear ducts?
Yes.
Klingons 1,000% have tear ducts. I've seen Kern crying before. That has happened.
According to Spock, in Undiscovered Country, Klingons do not have tear ducts.
Okay, but according to Undiscovered Country, Klingons have purple, blood that looks like Pepto-Bismol. That never comes back again either.
Yeah, okay, yeah, we forget about the purple blood thing. Although it does reappear in Lower Decks. There's a reference to it.
Oh, man. Well, now we keep going with the nonsense here because now Tom Paris starts talking about losing his virginity in his childhood bedroom, which is, just a normal Star Trek conversation.
This has to be the weirdest ranty Star Trek scene ever.
I know. Well, because then he shouts that he wants pizza. The whole thing is wild. Oh, and don't forget, he asks for a kiss, and we have to make a little joke about how, oh, no, not from the doctor. I want it from Kes. And then she declines because, well, she says because of the isolation field, but also because it's gross. And then he dies, and so does all sense. Just dies with him.
The other thing in this scene which just cracks me up is this doctor's plan to irradiate him. And the doctor says up the dosage to 98 rads per second. Now, rads are an accumulative dose of radiation. So if you're irradiating him at almost 100 rads a second, give him 10 seconds and you're reaching a lethal dose. The doctor has basically cooked Tom with high levels of radiation.
Oh, maybe that's why he died.
It's pretty clear that the technical advisor was definitely on vacation when this script was written.
Yeah.
So
they were not there.
Yeah, because, a good way to help biological organisms
radiation
is to irradiate them at lethal levels.
We love rads.
Oh, my God. Oh, no.
And one other thing here is after Tom dies, the doctor tells Kes to drop the isolation field. Isn't he worried about the Tom-sized lump of highly radioactive waste sitting on the biobed?
Not to mention, you have no idea what happened. It could be a pathogen. It could be anything.
Could be a virus. Yeah.
We're reaching Prometheus levels of stupidity with our medical team here.
Yes. And this was eye roll number 4.
And we still haven't got to my worst point in the episode. It's coming. Oh, my God. Later, the doctor is working in the dark when he hears some scraping noises, and he lifts the sheet that is covering Tom's dead body. And guess what? Tom is alive and breathing, though he still looks terrible. And he pulls out a clump of his hair from the back of his head, which was a very strange moment. I don't know if it was supposed to be really dramatic, but it wasn't. It was just like, what is happening?
Well, of course his hair's falling out.
He's been irradiated.
Suffering from massive radiation poisoning.
It's more like, I'm back from the dead. That's not the important thing.
No, it's the little piece of hair that I just pulled out.
I'm going bald.
Oh, no. Oh, my God. Well, the doctor is shocked, of course, to find Tom alive, but he's also shocked that his organs are functioning again, and he's apparently grown a second heart.
So this is where we actually get the first Doctor Who crossover in Star Trek. He's a Time Lord, and he's regenerating.
Yes.
That was in my notes, too, because yesterday we recorded a Prodigy episode, and we talked about the parallels between Doctor Who and Star Trek, and it's like, oh, and here's another one with the 2 hearts.
I'm debating whether that's eye roll number 5.
Well, if we think about the absolute crazy stuff that happens in Doctor Who, this would be totally normal in Doctor Who. Everything that's happened here, I could see them doing the same kind of baloney. Because there's many episodes of that show that are so weird, and it's not like they even focus on the sci-fi.
Yeah, but, that's part of Doctor Who. It fits in Doctor Who.
No, this would fit better, yeah.
Right.
Okay, now we go to the guy who has been communicating secretly with Seska. Does anybody have the foggiest idea what this guy's name is? Because he's had so little to do. I don't even have a nickname for him. I don't know who he is.
Give him
I believe he's listed as interchangeable balding guy number 47.
You can't call him Snodgrass because that's already a guy.
Snodgrass is taken. I think I'm gonna call him Shady Joe because I got nothing.
All right, Shady Joe. Wait, no, that sounds like something that the former president would say. So.
Oh. Shady Bob.
There you go.
Shady Bob.
So Shady Bob calls the Kazon, apparently trying to convince them that he's a legit bad guy, which is very funny, I have to say. And he shares all of the data about the Warp 10 flight. And the Kazon dude asks if the pilot survived, and Shady Bob says, in a manner of speaking, which is so funny. But he says, this should prove my worth.
I have not been on this podcast in a while, but I really have. And we're going to be done with them, thankfully, the end of the season.
Yeah.
but I despise the Kazon.
I'm not a
They're
fan.
the worst. Every time I see one, I'm like, why does this guy have a whole salad on his head?
I know.
What are you doing? They're
The
like,
hair is wild. They're actually, Atiba, I don't think you've watched Prodigy. They're actually also on Prodigy, and they're pretty good on there. You probably should watch it just to get a better idea of the Kazon, because the Kazon are, they're so ridiculous on here.
Okay.
They're actually a little better on Prodigy. Yeah.
So many times, what we have talked about is how I just don't find them menacing. They're just ridiculous.
they're budget Klingons.
Yeah.
Yes.
For my money, the Vidians are a much better foe.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah, for sure. I think what we talked about is that they're almost meant to be sort of barbarian versions of Klingons, like earlier versions, who just haven't evolved as much. And I don't even buy that. I don't even think that's true.
Yes.
I'll add this one scene of this guy making the call
Shady Bob.
and the Kazon being a little reticent. This actually is the one bit I think makes sense in the show.
Yeah.
I brought up the idea that they could be trying to capture Seska because of the strategic value she's worth to the Kazon. So going through a process of trying to lure Seska into a trap would make absolute sense for Voyager. And I think Seska would think that too. So a level of caution would probably work with her.
Maybe, but I think the whole point of Seska and the Kazon is like, we like our chances better with the Kazon than we do with Janeway. And why would anyone ever think that? Like, why?
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Seska is a member of the race which caused all the problems with the Marquis and murdered your people. And you're like, hey, I'm going to throw in my lot with her. What's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
She kills you?
Back in sickbay, the doctor is explaining to the captain that Tom's DNA is rewriting itself and he's going through some kind of mutation. Janeway asks if this was related to that enzymatic imbalance that the doctor previously diagnosed, but he says no. Tom is growing new organs and weird things are happening to his brain. He's changing constantly and he's also acting erratically. He seems to still know who he is, but his behavior is unpredictable.
So he's going through puberty?
Yes. Janeway tries to talk to him, and he no longer looks like Tom. In this scene, he looks like he's mutating into an extremely terrible version of Neelix based on the color of his hair. It's very strange.
And he's also very flaky.
Yes, it's just like skin's just hanging off his head. When she tells him that they're trying to fix him, he gets very upset, thinking maybe he's changing into something better. But then he also sort of spouts like a conspiracy theory about everybody lying to him and being out to get him. And the conversation just does not go well.
Was this just lifted from Jeff Goldblum's rant in The Fly?
It could be. Listen, I feel really bad for McNeil here because like he's really trying to act and elevate this material into something. And it's just like, well, all I can focus on is your pulsating head right now.
I know it does pulsate. It's so weird. So there's things hanging off his head, and his teeth, for some reason, are all yellow, and his eyes are all messed up. And Janeway tries to sympathize with him when he says he's scared, but he suddenly lunges at her violently. But he's stopped by the containment field, and Janeway has seen enough.
I was getting a real vibe of The Fly in that scene of when Jeff Goldblum does the bit where he rants and he goes, I'm becoming something better.
There's definitely a lot of Fly vibes in this whole episode. Like, trying to do body horror, but like not well.
But the thing that he says here about the conspiracy theories and everybody's lying to him, there's no basis for this. This is where I mean that they were trying to do this thing with his character of Tom.
Yeah.
Where they were trying to say he felt like he'd been told he was going to be special, but he wasn't special. And now he feels like people are telling him that he's doing a good job, but they're really just not telling him the truth because he's so insecure. But they just do it so badly here, you know?
Well, and it doesn't even wrap up because he talked about how his father would put him down all the time.
No.
So it's like, was he being told he was special all the time? Or was he being told he was worthless?
Yeah, it makes no sense. Okay, now we have arrived at what I can only describe as the worst moment in Star Trek history.
Wow.
When the character of Tom Paris starts choking and convulsing and he spits out his own tongue. This, to me, is the cliff that we cannot come back from. Whatever other crazy shit has ever happened in Star Trek, this is the most ridiculous. I still can't even believe they did it. And I look really carefully at the actors' faces as they're supposed to be reacting to this. And I'm like, how are you not just laughing? It's insanity, especially when he holds it. He's like, look, here's my tongue.
The true insanity? That's pretty insane. What is also insane is the fact that he still gets 2 more pages of dialogue with no tongue.
I know. It's so. Oh my God.
And that, listeners, is eye roll number 6.
Oh,
how your eyes should have just gone out of your head at this point. It's so bad.
See, all right. So at this point, I'm just all right. I'm just going wherever this ride takes me. I'm like,
yeah. So the way we normally do this is we watch an episode. Sometimes we watch it together, but then we watch it and do the notes. And when I got through it, I was like, I can't believe I have to watch that again and sit down and take notes. I didn't want to do it. It's just, I put it off as much as I could. I did it really late last night because I was like, oh my God, I can't believe this. After yet another dramatic ad break, the genetic mutation rate is increasing, and Tom continues without a tongue trying to have a conversation with the doctor, saying he must get off this ship. I mean, at this point, let's get him off the ship. Oh, man.
I have to say, I just feel for McNeil at this point.
I think I read that he enjoyed the challenge of working with the prosthetics and everything. It probably was fun for one episode, but he's doing the best he can with what's going on.
Yeah.
The doctor has look, back to the technobabble now, because the doctor has an idea to try to get Tom's DNA to revert to its original coding. And for some reason, it involves hooking him up to the warp core. And I'm honestly not sure what the solution is, and I don't think it matters. So I'm just going to jump right to the experiment. And we get Tom, who, at least now at this point, he doesn't have the skin hanging off himself anymore. Yeah. He's completely changed now. James and I talked a lot today. We're trying to figure out, who does he look like? What other alien creature, either in Star Trek or something else, that he looks like?
Yeah.
And to me, it's a little bit like a version of Admiral Akbar. Like he's a really distant cousin of him or something. Because of the way his mouth goes, and the eyes aren't the same is maybe the only thing. But I don't know, it's pretty close.
I was thinking more like Tosk from the Deep Space Nine episode.
Captive Pursuit, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even the guys that are chasing Tosk, I think.
Yeah. They feel like there's a little bit of influence there.
But I know we're missing something. We'll probably get an email about it, but yeah, it's wild. All right, so I don't know what we're doing, but we start this process and everything goes wrong pretty much immediately. And from the doctor and Kess's point of view, because they're just watching through a view screen from sickbay, they just hear a lot of noise and then they see some phaser fire before the comms go out. Okay,
so first of all, wasn't anybody watching the container that Tom was in that clearly wasn't shut correctly?
Zero security.
They put him in the container and they actually have it rattling. Isn't anybody watching? And then that whole scene of where they're watching through the view screen and you see like the shouting and the B'Elanna says, oh my God. Yeah. And then you see the phases. I thought that was funny. That was almost like a comedy. It was like something out of Airplane. I was expecting like to see bodies flying around.
I can see what they were doing, right? Well, all the time when you're watching at least the 90s Star Treks, when they do something like that, you're thinking, well, they're just trying to save money, right? They're not going to do any effects. They can't afford to do that in this episode. I think it's not a bad idea to do this because the Doctor and Kess don't know what happened. It's almost like this is a good idea for directing, but it's dumb here. They didn't need to do it here. I think if they had just ended with B'Elanna and her, oh my God, and then everything went out.
And then it was cut off.
It would have been better, yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise I look at it almost like comedy.
Yeah, it's very silly.
Eye roll number 7.
Tuvok issues a security alert as power fluctuates around the ship. And we see Janeway marching down the hallway, putting a phaser on her hip as Chakotay calls to report that Thomas broke out of his confinement in engineering, where they had apparently, zero security, nobody watching him. Yeah. And he used a phaser on something that caused power outages around the ship, which...
Plasma conduit.
Okay, a plasma conduit. It makes little sense to me that there's, again, no security, but also that there's no redundant systems and you could shoot one thing and everything around the ship is out of commission.
And you keep active phasers in engineering.
Right. Well, anyway, because of the widespread power failures, they've been unable to track him. And so naturally, just as Janeway gets ready to step into the turbo lift, she hears heavy breathing behind her, which is even said in the closed caption, heavy breathing.
Heavy breathing.
But before she can grab her phaser, she's knocked backwards to the floor and is knocked out. And we see the now really alien lizard thing of Tom carrying Janeway to the transwarp shuttle.
Who apparently can breathe oxygen again.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like we forgot about that. Harry reports that a shuttle is launching, and of course they're unable to stop it. And then the shuttle very quickly disappears as it goes to warp 10. And Janeway, meanwhile, on the shuttle wakes up just as they're going to transwarp. So she experiences that everything everywhere all at once moment as well.
Yeah. So they don't have a way of closing the shuttle bay doors or disabling all the shuttles remotely.
No, he shot the plasma conduit.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Everything's broken.
Everything's broken.
Oh, man.
I'm picturing in the writer's room somebody actually flying because they must have been waving their hands so fast they actually were able to gain air.
Oh, very funny. Well, we get Chakotay now giving a log saying it took them 3 days to find the shuttle in an uninhabited system. And the doctor has good news. He believes he understands the transformation that Tom was going through. He says the mutations were actually normal and are consistent with the evolutionary development of the human genotype observed over the past 4 million years. Tom has just evolved naturally, but at an accelerated rate. Apparently, traveling at infinite velocity accelerated the natural human evolutionary process.
Okay.
Well, first of all, before you say anything, I want to tell everybody that as I look at my Zoom window here, the two of you had your faces covered as I was describing this scene. Oh, my God.
Where do we start with this?
Oh, my God.
To reference Atiba's comment from earlier, yes, the technical advisor was on vacation and was out of telephone reach at this point. First of all, evolution takes place because of random mutation. There's not a direction that the genome is heading in. It's so bad. You can't predict the randomness of a process that's influenced by external factors that give those mutations an advantage in the environment that the organism is in. You can't look at an organism now and say, in 10 million years' time, that's going to turn into a velociraptor, because you don't know the environmental advantages that the mutations would give that creature. The only thing I can assume is that the Doctor is programmed in intelligent design.
Okay, so giving the Doctor the benefit of the doubt, I will say that perhaps evolution works differently in the Star Trek universe, because this is not the first instance where no one has understood how evolution works.
No.
There's a Next Gen episode where the Enterprise is adrift and everybody on the Enterprise is quote unquote evolving, and it doesn't make any sense. Like, why is Worf turned into some kind of insectoid creature?
Yeah.
I forgot about that one. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't, this is just mutation, guys.
Yeah.
This is just...
Well, I actually think they could have, with just a couple of changes to his dialogue, they could have explained it better.
Yeah.
Right? If look, this is not my area of science. I don't know that much about it. But if I just kind of go by what you said, that it's impacted by environment and whatever other factors are around, if instead of thinking that this is the natural evolution that humans would have turned into in a million years, if instead what he said was when you accelerate evolution and you don't have those normal environmental impacts around you, this is what could happen, right? If he said it that way, like you could evolve to this, then it's like you could have sort of fixed it.
Right.
But that's not what he said. He's like, oh, this is what humans are going to turn into in a million years. And everybody watching Star Trek went, what?
Your idea would make more sense there, because if the mutations don't give you an advantage, they just work. So the creature still continues to survive. Then, yeah, you could say that if you keep on making all these changes, you could end up with something that's completely wacky and completely random that still can survive, but it didn't have those mutations didn't give it any advantage to continue to the next generation and so on and so on.
I hadn't thought about this before, but I'm going to compare Star Trek to The Simpsons. And they sort of joke on The Simpsons about all of the radiation leaks around the power plant, and there's like fish with 3 eyes and things in the water. Yeah. I mean, you're the one who pointed out how they just irradiated Tom earlier. Maybe he caused this bizarre mutation. Oh. Not that it was a natural mutation that was going to happen.
So the doctor's hedging because nobody else has the knowledge that he does. And he's saying, it was totally natural. Wasn't caused by me irradiating
Totally
him.
normal. Totally normal.
Nothing to do with
could
me.
have predicted it.
Yeah.
Or shooting antiprotons directly into his body from the warp reactor.
Please don't look too closely at this.
No problem.
Okay, I'm pretty sure, I have to go back and check, but I'm pretty sure whoever wrote this actually did write Prometheus.
It was Brandon Braga who wrote this episode. He's written some great episodes. This is not one of them.
Oh, it was?
Yeah.
I think maybe he put his name on this and didn't actually write it. Or he was in the middle of a fever dream.
He says he wrote it. He says he wrote it, but he also says it was changed.
I was running a temperature of 105 when I wrote it.
He said some of his explanation about the evolutionary part was taken out.
Yeah.
And he felt that would have made it better, but
Okay.
I don't think that would have fixed it. It's still bad.
It still gets eye roll number 8.
Well, I do like the dig the doctor makes here when he says this evolution isn't terribly attractive. That is quite funny. But he does double down on his anti-proton approach, which involved hooking Tom up to the warp core. He believes that will work to restore his original DNA, but with increased intensity of the treatment. Harry calls to say they located the shuttle in the jungles on one of the planets in the system. And, of course, we are off the rails over the cliff, and somehow we're still going to make it worse from here. We beam down to the jungles of this planet, and we find 2 human-sized salamander-like creatures and their little salamander babies. Oh, no.
This is the point. This is the point where the train is at the bottom of the canyon and you're getting the full explosion.
Yeah, I think you are right. They recognize traces of human DNA in these creatures, so they are pretty sure it's Tom and the captain, though they don't know which is which. Chakotay stuns the creatures with his phaser and says he doesn't know how he's going to enter this into the log. No, man, that is funny.
You and me both. Chakotay.
Tuvok, though, has the line of the episode. I look forward to reading it.
No. No, the line of the episode is still to come, but that is a good one. We take our crew members and we leave the babies to fend for themselves, probably completely destroying the ecosystem of this planet, but whatever. No big deal.
Yes, that's one of my notes. So you're leaving an invasive species behind on this planet?
Yes. We talked about Voyager just leaving destruction behind their wake, right? Like, we recently did I think today we're releasing the episode about the robot that they save.
Yeah.
And we're pretty sure that those robots are still going to make more robots, and they probably are going to destroy the whole quadrant. But that's okay. We're getting away from them. We're moving on.
That's all a long way away. We'll be fine.
That's right. Back to Voyager, and the captain and Paris are somehow completely back to normal. The doctor says it will take some time for their genetic codes to stabilize, so they're to remain in sickbay for a few days.
And they're highly radioactive.
Janeway goes to chat with Tom, who is a bit uncomfortable now with their relationship. And Janeway says she's often thought about having children, but she never considered having them with Tom. which is very funny.
Comedy like this is priceless. This is almost Lower Decks.
Oh, it is. I would agree. It would work. This would have worked as a Lower Decks episode. Tom apologizes and says he doesn't remember much about the mating. And then Janeway delivers this classic line, "What makes you think it was your idea?"
I think we can all agree. Eye roll number 9.
Yeah, so you're thinking that the train is going into the canyon at this point? At this point in the episode, I'm looking for real estate. I'm trying to find... I'm like, this is just where I live now.
There's no train. It's exploded. Oh.
All I can say is, if Lower Decks does not reference this episode...
Oh my god. They have to go to the planet with the 3 salamander kids.
Yes, they need to. It has to happen.
I'm sure they will. I mean, they've referenced it, but yeah, I think they need to go to the planet or they need to find the salamander babies.
Yeah.
Well, for some insane reason, we don't end here. We have to go just a few more steps where I feel like now we try to clean up the mess we've made in this episode. Yeah. It doesn't work, but this is what we're going to try to do. Janeway says she's putting Tom in for a commendation. Regardless of the outcome, he did make the first transwarp flight. Are you going to put it all into that commendation? Tom says he thought making history would change things, but he doesn't feel any different. He's starting to realize he needs to stop worrying about everyone else's opinions of him and just worry about himself. And it's honestly, if this is the lesson of the episode, there's so many other ways we could have done it than what we did.
Yeah.
And this is the end. This is how it ends.
Right. Did somebody shout cut and they figured, yeah, we'll fix it in post, and they didn't?
Oh, wow. Okay. Shall we overanalyze? I don't know anymore.
Yes.
It's so dumb.
Oh, we so need to.
All right, you go ahead.
Okay. I feel what they were trying to do here, at its core, leaving everything aside, was trying to deal with the fact that Tom suffers from extreme self-loathing.
Yeah.
He had a terrible upbringing.
Mhm.
He's riddled with self-doubt and has this very negative side of himself and self-destructive, which we saw in the episode where Harry got stuck in the alternative timeline.
All right.
And I feel that was the story they were trying to tell, but they wrapped all of this around it.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. We were trying to advance the character of Tom Paris. And I think if you just looked at that and you pulled out those pieces of what they were trying to do, you could have done it in many different ways. The trouble was you wrapped it in such a terrible episode, it's really hard to take any of it seriously.
I think you guys might be giving too much credit. I think the writers saw The Fly, went into the writer's room and said, guess what, you guys?
Maybe. I mean, we've seen many examples of that where there was some movie that they were trying to make into an episode. Yeah.
Next thing. So this ship on its own with just Harry, B'Elanna, and Tom have figured out how to break the transwarp barrier.
Well, they did introduce the dilithium as well, so that it wasn't just them.
So it was also a technological or find of a different type of dilithium.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the whole thing with Neelix and the nacelles, that was not good.
Not good.
Mm-mm.
There's another question here. So they have this dilithium. They can break the warp barrier. You don't have to. Why don't you just go at warp 9.999998? And then you don't suffer from your genome evolving and all the other problems, and you get home in 3 weeks.
Or
It doesn't work from a technical standpoint.
Or clearly you have a cure to whatever this is when you go warp 10.
Just do it.
Oh, right.
And then cure everybody.
Or set up a containment field that's firing these antiprotons and stops you from evolving.
Yeah, maybe you actually could somehow put everybody into some kind of confinement zones or pods or something to protect them from it so that whatever happens, it doesn't affect their brains, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real hole in this terrible story, which is they cured it. Everything is fine at the end. So why wouldn't we do this?
Yeah, what's to stop you?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, they're also completely forgetting about the fact that they've had point-to-point transport since, for 120 years since Discovery.
Nobody knows about Discovery. Nobody knows anything about it.
The mycelial network. Oh, forget I said that. Next thing, there's a line where B'Elanna says, now they've cracked warp 10. All they need to do is figure out how to navigate and they can go anywhere. Well, didn't Tom do that? And the fact that after he reached warp 10, he jumped back to within a few kilometers of Voyager?
So the episode says something really strange that, like, when he shut off the engine, the shuttle automatically came back to Voyager.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he did anything. It seems like almost...
No. He said that he knew that they were looking for him.
Right.
And then it came back.
So that's the point. So he knows how to navigate.
If it's just one person on the shuttle, imagine if it was everybody, all 150 people or whatever it is on Voyager. How would you control where they would go?
Oh, well, person at the helm, hopefully. Tom, he knows how to navigate.
But you can't stop people from thinking.
And again, like, to reach back into TNG, like, if this is all part of that Traveler from Tau Alpha C thought and warp and all that stuff being combined, maybe that plays into it in some way.
I was thinking the same thing.
That's awesome that you brought that up. Okay, because my last point here is, was this actually warp 10 causing this? Maybe an alien race outside of regular space-time in some kind of warp dimension or warp alternative that looked at Tom traveling faster than warp 10 and went, oh, look at his DNA. It's all messed up. We need to fix it.
Oh, we've had that before. Yeah.
Yes. So they were the ones that messed with him, fixed his DNA, and then returned him back to the ship. So what we're seeing is actually an alien race that interfered with Tom, thinking they were doing the right thing.
Was that on Strange New Worlds where that happened?
That does happen in the original series, but it has nothing to do with going somewhere.
It happened in the cartoon series because they made, was it Spock or was it Bones, breathe underwater?
Oh, yeah.
That's another weird episode where they don't understand evolution.
But the thing with the Traveler is part of being able to open up different realities was about thought.
Yeah.
And so at least that links to something else that we've talked about a few times in Star Trek. And it's in Prodigy, too.
So you think this was aiming at a higher science fiction concept?
Yeah, how the Travelers move if you've watched through Prodigy.
It's a shame they didn't show that.
Again, that's giving the writers a lot of credit.
It is. Yeah.
I remembered what I wanted to say now. I think this finally answers one of the questions I've had about what the heck happens to the Kazon after season 3.
Oh. They transwarped somewhere and all turned into salamanders.
They all turn into salamanders, and we don't have to deal with them. That's great.
That makes perfect sense. I think that's good headcanon. And that wraps up my over-analysis.
All right, Atiba, do you have anything else?
I do, but I think we should probably get to women in the future first.
I don't know. You're overselling women in the future. I don't really think there's anything egregiously sexist in this episode. Is there something creepy at the end? Yes. Is that a little bit strange? Yes. But my complaint generally is about not allowing women to do their jobs, right? And just being outwardly sexist against them and underestimating them. And I don't think that happens here.
You may have missed it in the very beginning of the episode in the mess hall. Tom, B'Elanna, and Harry are talking about how are we going to fix the shuttle? What are we going to do?
And B'Elanna goes for cookies.
Right. Don't you think you would want the chief engineer to be in that conversation?
It would have made more sense if they sent Harry for cookies. I don't disagree with that.
Or Neelix?
Yeah. Well, or Neil. Well, yeah, obviously Neelix.
I think you would send Tom because Harry, if you remember, in the alternative...
He's the engineer,
timeline, he developed a new type of warp drive. So Harry is the genius.
Yeah, but he's the lowest rank one. I would say he's the one who generally would get sent for cookies. I see what you're saying, but I would argue if you watched this episode kind of in isolation, that makes sense, that they're leaving the chief engineer out of an engineering discussion. Why would they do that? Is it because she was a woman? But in terms of how Voyager works, that normally is not what happens. Normally, B'Elanna solves the problem, and she is very heavily used as an engineer. So it's not as if there's a trend in that at all, But I see your point, and it is a little weird. Like, she goes, do you have any food? And then she goes to the kitchen, gets cookies, and they come up with this idea without her. Yeah. But I don't think that's egregiously sexist, just as a moment on its own, yeah.
It just seems especially weird because her whole deal is she's supposed to be great at coming up with improvised, out of the box, like, ideas about stuff.
She does it all the time.
So, like, why is all this in Neelix's mouth instead of hers?
And really, if you look at it, look, this episode is so crazy. It's easy to miss a lot of things, but I mean, realistically, it doesn't make sense that Tom would be able to solve any of these problems. It should have been Harry and B'Elanna. Yeah. They are the two engineers. That would have made more sense, even if it had come from a folksy story from Neelix, because that happens also in the robot episode where he tells her something like, oh, the only way I solved a problem is with a night's sleep, and then she solves her problem, right? So I mean, I think it's quite similar, but yeah, I'm guessing the only reason they didn't do that is because this is a Tom episode. Yeah. But you're right, that doesn't make sense. It should have been B'Elanna.
Because more realistically, Tom is the disposable test pilot.
Right, he's the pilot, he's not the engineer, yeah.
Maybe do an automated test flight first before we just strap humans into the shuttle and shoot it off at warp 10?
Yeah, why wouldn't you do it without a person in it the first time?
Well, who's going to get the glory of being the first test pilot?
Well, you can still be the first test pilot. It's just that the first time they did it was with a drone or whatever.
Yeah, maybe stick the doctor in there. I don't know if shuttles have hollow emitters at this point, but...
Yeah. Well, if I look at Janeway's leadership corner, I do think that Janeway was actually pretty great with Tom, just in terms of a leader, even in the face of this ridiculous episode. When she went to see him about maybe not taking the flight, she was sincere. She listened to his concerns. She gave the entire team kudos for their work when they had that first meeting where they showed the simulation and how it worked. But she specifically pointed out to Tom that he'll be remembered with the names of other famous pilots. I mean, that was great, right? Just as a leader, but you got to like pull those pieces out of the nonsense of the episode. Yeah. The other thing I have in the leadership corner is maybe we need to do Tuvok's security review as a section on the podcast because, man, did we blow it again on security. We had somebody, I think it was on Facebook, suggest to us that because they had just gotten through our ReBinge Deep Space Nine podcast and they were still remembering how when we would say provisional government, James and I would go drink because they said it so many times. And it's like maybe every time they have some egregious security problem, we could say drink. And here, this is drink.
Tuvok missed installing security guards in engineering. Drink.
So ridiculous.
That might be a good idea, but you guys might be unconscious.
A lot of drinking. Yeah. A lot of drinking.
Didn't manage to get through the episode.
Well, then, before we do rating, was there anything else, Atiba?
I think we covered everything that I wanted to say in this episode, except really, after watching it this time, I kind of really enjoyed it for what it was.
Yeah.
Just on its own merits. If it wasn't...
Your expectations were low.
Exactly.
Yeah. Here are the three things in my overanalysis section. My first sentence is, this was incredibly dumb. My next one was, the real problem here is that in the end, everything was fine, and yet we just completely reject this as an alternative to get us home. That was my second one.
Yes, forgotten.
And then my third one was, recently we talked about Voyager leaving behind destruction in its wake, and here we did it again, where we probably destroyed that whole system with those salamander babies.
Yep.
And then the one thing I do have in my Women in the Future, Atiba, I forgot to read this line in my notes, but it says, the ending is weird, but it's no weirder than Tom spitting out his tongue, which is the weirdest of the weird. All right, then, are we ready to do rating?
Yes.
Let's go.
So thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. James, what is your rating?
This episode is so strange because I'm giving it a thumbs down.
Sure.
But it's kind of like watching a train wreck. It's bizarrely watchable because it's just so weird. I might even have to go with neutral.
Okay,
oh.
Wait a second. Don't overthink it.
You're freaking out, Atiba.
When you watch a train wreck, yes, it's good to watch until you remember, people are dying.
There's people
and there's
dying,
property damage, and it's just terrible overall.
And in California, it might start a fire and burn down the whole state.
Well, I'm thinking about one of those train wrecks where they're actually just testing the train to see what's happening and not an actual one where people are
I don't like those reels that you get when you're on Instagram that show things crashing. I don't want to see it.
Yeah.
Or tornadoes or, things blowing up. No, thank you. Just show me cats.
Even though the episode's terrible, you can see where some of the things they were trying to do, but it needed a lot more work. So I'm really taken. I think I'm going to it's just getting the thumbs down because it's bad, but it's strangely watchable because it's terrible. It does feel like one of those schlock horror movies where it's full of holes and you're just watching it to see what the effects look like.
I mean, you can't give a neutral to an episode where the guy holds his tongue in his hand. You can't. What are you even talking about?
Yeah. So I think
you're right.
In summary, it's just the thumbs down.
Okay. Atiba.
It's a thumbs down. In fact, it's a spit out tongue down for me.
Oh, that is so gross. A new low.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, I understand. Don't get me wrong. I love a good bad movie as much as anyone. But at the end of the day, they're bad. They are bad. It's not good.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, objectively terrible. Thumbs down. I just don't see how you could give it any other rating. But I am going to say this. I don't think it's the worst episode of Star Trek.
Oh, no.
Well, because there are horrible examples of racism and misogyny that just cannot be ignored, especially when those things are played for laughs, right?
Yeah.
Now you're actually insulting me and you're insulting society and you're bringing us down. And Star Trek is supposed to be showing us a better future for everyone. And those are the episodes that I think are the worst. This episode has the worst scene, bar none, with that tongue. I've never seen anything worse in Star Trek. As in, I'm just like, what am I even doing when I'm watching this happen? And the second half of the episode is just, no one can disagree. It's just awful. I mean, thumbs way, way, way down, but it is not the worst episode of Star Trek, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Atiba, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I agree. Okay. I agree. It is not the worst. It is not the worst. It is definitely in the bottom 6 or 7.
It's the worst episode we've seen of Voyager so far. That's easy.
It is definitely the worst episode of Voyager.
Yeah. Have we covered everything?
I think we shouldn't forget the writer of this episode also wrote the Candle episode of TNG.
That is true. I mean, and that is widely derided, that episode.
That episode, though, is hilariously bad. It's actually funny. It's so bad.
Now, that is a sexist episode, if we'd like to go and talk about that one. That one is so bad.
The hipster in me wants to go in and find a reason to defend it, but I don't think it's possible.
There's probably some things in it that aren't terrible. Look, Next Gen did not treat its women well. There's no doubt.
And I think that wraps it up for me.
All right, then, Atiba, is there anything that you would like to share with us about things you've got going on?
I will be tabling at San Diego Comic Fest at the Sheridan in Carlsbad or at the end of October. Also, I'll have a bunch of other things going on, so be sure to follow me at my Instagram at AtibaK. And be sure to follow my podcast I do with my brother, where we have very silly conversations on all manner of pop culture topics. It is called the Teebs and Kid Phoenix Versus Podcast, and you can find that wherever fine podcasts are sold.
Your episode on preparing for Comic-Con is a classic.
Thank you, James.
I randomly met your brother at Comic-Con because we ended up in the same panel, unknowing to each other that we were there, but I did meet him. And we were thinking, yesterday we were talking about when the Section 31 movie comes out, that might be an opportunity for the 4 of us to podcast again together. All right, then I think that wraps up this terrible episode. Season 2, episode 15. I mean, it's clearly a great episode of the podcast, but a terrible episode of Star Trek.
It is a Star Trek event.
It definitely is. In the meantime, if you'd like to send us your overanalysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, you can email us at ReBingeIT@gmail.com. You can also hit us up on the socials, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at ReBingeIT, or you can join the Facebook group, facebook.com/groups/Star Trek TTM podcasts.
Thanks for joining us on the ReBinge Star Trek Voyager podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.
And that's it for me.